welcome to our sixth and final event in the Max Weber Foundation Web Forum series on the digital transformation. Today, this last event is special in two regards. First, we are presenting research from within the Max Weber Foundation, research conducted at various institutes. And second, we have a larger group of presentations, altogether 6, and they will be, of course, shorter than the ones we had in previous events, and we'll discuss each presentation separately. So today you will see sort of the broad range of activities in the Max Weber Foundations in the field of digital humanities, and you will also learn through this variety that digital humanities can mean a lot of things. I'm not going to say anything further, but hand over to Harald KÜMMERLE, who will moderate the session and who will himself also be a presenter. And he's, of course, much more an expert in the field of digital humanities than I am. So I'm looking forward to an interesting and stimulating event. And I'll hand over to you, Harald, please.
Thank you, Franz. This event was compiled by the AK Digital Humanities, Arbeitskreis Digital Humanities of the foundation. We originally had planned this as a conference in Tokyo, but because this was not possible, we moved the poster session that was planned online. And today it won't be poster presentations, but rather short slide presentations from 6 of our institutes. We now have 11 institutes. The ones who wanted to present were able to present, or have been able to present. And we will go from mostly from the east to the west because of the time that is already quite progressed here in Tokyo. But we will start in Washington with Jana KECK, who has to go to another event afterwards, but will give us our presentation, give us her presentation first. And yeah, so without wasting any further time, please, Jana, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Harald. No, that's not what I want. Perfect. Here. You can see my slide.
Yes.
Okay, perfect. Most machine learning systems that are deployed in the world today learn from human feedback. Unlike robots in the movies, most of today's artificial intelligence cannot learn by itself. Instead, it relies intensively on human feedback. Probably 90% of machine learning applications today are powered by supervised machine learning. This figure covers a wide range of use cases. Your in-home device knows what to do when you say turn up the volume because humans have spent thousands of hours telling it how to interpret different commands. And your machine translation service can translate between languages because it has been trained on thousands or maybe millions of human translated texts. Human-in-the-loop machine learning is a set of strategies for combining human and machine intelligence in applications that use AI. In my case, I do not develop these systems to influence user behavior on online shopping platforms, for instance, but instead to cope with big historical data, digitized 19th century newspapers, to reevaluate past migrant realities. Why I use it and how such a human-in-the-loop approach looks like for historical research will be the focus of today's talk. But let's start from the beginning. In my project, Text Mining America's German language newspapers, 1830 to 1914, processing Germanness, I examine reprinting practices. So which texts spread across states in decades, or using Ryan Cardell's terminology, went viral in the industrial age. For this purpose, I have used digitized 58 German language newspapers from Chronicling America by the Library of Congress and deployed text reuse detection to identify, extract, and cluster texts that appear in different editions. While in the beginning of my project, I had approached constructing a data set purely as a preparatory task necessary to enable the analysis of viral texts and the network system of German American newspapers I sought to write, I came to realize that this supposedly pre-critical activity formed an extended historical argument in and of itself. Exploring the data set of 500,000 reprinted texts, I found, apart from reprinted poems about German nationalism or lists about the US Census, many texts by well-known and anonymous female protagonists in hard news and short stories. I found women as motives in readership in factual texts or jokes, and as promotional figures in ads. Based on the term German womanist, I question whether the history of the German American press can no longer be written as a dominant male space created by successful editors because there are numerous texts for, by, and about women. But how can I systematically find these texts and identify different genres without having to read all 500,000 texts? So as a next step, I tried topic modeling. Topic modeling, of which you will also hear more in Harald's talk later, is an unsupervised machine learning technique that classifies words across documents into co-occurring word bundles, so-called topics. Unsupervised means that the classification is based only on the corpus itself. No further information, such as a gold standard of labeled content, is provided. There is, however, some pre-processing involved in order to avoid trivial topics. This includes the filtering of highly frequent words or setting all words to lowercase, as in the case with the German language. Several topics can be represented in a document, and words can occur in several topics. While investigating the individual topics, I came to realize that certain words representing this topic were reflecting specific newspaper genres. So I asked myself, could I go one step further and use supervised machine learning? So mixing manual annotation of text with active learning to automatically classify reprinted text into newspaper genres. For this purpose, I teamed up with computational linguist Andrea Blessing from the University of Stuttgart to build a topic-based annotation platform. Our initial idea was to build a platform where I could examine both the words representing the different topics and a random selection of some reprinted text that represent this topic with a high and a low likelihood. Annotation is the process of labeling raw data so that it becomes training data for machine learning. Most scholars will tell you that they spend much more time curating and annotating data sets than they spend building the machine learning models. For this purpose, we have used the DFR browser, an interactive visualization that was originally created by Andrew Goldstone, and have expanded it with an annotation application. The objective of this approach is to enable different modes of reading of both numeric and textual data. So basically, as you can see here on the slide, I can look at the different topics and then to the left first investigate the words representing this topic. Then I have this random selection of reprint clusters, and I can click, for instance, here on one of the reprint clusters. I can read in this part, so to speak, in this new browser site, I can read the text and directly assign a genre to this text. And if I'm not sure what this kind of genre or what genre this text belongs to, I can also get redirected to the Chronicling America site and read the text, and then subsequently assign the text to a respective genre. This labeled data, as a result of combining machine and handmade annotation, has then been used to train a classifier, which has then been used to assign more metadata genre to the entire data set of reprinted text. With this approach, I have identified, as you can see here on the slide, 10 genres and created 10 subsets of reprinted text. On a pragmatic level, the objective is to publish the genre classified data set so that it can be used for further research in the field. For the next steps of my analysis, I examine these subsets to zoom in and out by using corpus-based statistics, close reading, and network analysis. As regards the former, I am looking if women, according to the words denoting them, such as Frau, Fräulein, Weib, Dirn, Mädchen, ihre Kinder, are more likely to be represented in specific genres than in others. And apart from the perspective of women, are specific genres more similar to one another than others? You have to imagine that the classification model does not provide binary results, such as text A is or is not hard news, but rather describes that a text may have the likelihood of belonging 0.1 to genre list, 0.2 to genre factual text, and 0.7 to genre poem. Returning to the women, I asked, why do specific stories seem to surpass time? Combining reprinting with genre and gender enables an interesting angle to study intertextuality of popular text, to show how specific concepts, stories, characters, or plots travel across time and space, and how they are used and revised in fictional as well as non-fictional writings. Before I end this talk, I want to show you one example in which a specific popular topic about women is reflected in different reprinted texts and genres. The literary work under investigation here is the fairy tale of Aschenputtel, Cinderella, a tale about class, gender, and marital status. I just want to show you here on the slide 4 of the numerous examples of the diverse intertextual references reprinted across states and decades. The English version Cinderella is used for the name of a shoe store. Aschenbrödel is used in the introduction of a factual text written by an anonymous woman that reflects on women's position in society and their differences to men. In a joke about a shoemaker, we do not have an explicit expression of her, but we get the reference through the act of putting on her shoe. Or in the last example, here the protagonist is referred to as Die weiße Sklavin, the white slave, in the short story by Agnes Ströbel, written in Germany. Die weiße Sklavin tells the dreadful fate of a young Fräulein, of a good German family that ends up as a servant in the US because of the death of her father. The short story tells the sorrows of her labor as a white slave who wanders from household to household her entire life, where she always remains das Fräulein. Since her Herrin in the United States never lets her come to rest and is shouting Fräulein, Fräulein, Fräulein all the time, she ages rapidly and has no time to think about her place as an unmarried migrant woman in society. The short story is reprinted in the 1890s, where there are several reprinted hard news reporting on the suicide of young maids, both in Germany and the US. While factual texts, ads, or jokes represent humorous or parodical adaptations of the fairy tale, placing emphasis on the shoe and marriage for upward mobility, hard news and short stories resemble tragedies where the female character remains unmarried, a white slave that eventually commits suicide. Juxtaposing genres, enabled through the application of machine learning, presents an interesting case to study the rise of fictionality in popular German-American newspaper literature and shows how insufficient simple binary classification systems are that only distinguish between fiction and nonfiction. Would I have found these texts and be able to compare them without computation methods? The answer is no. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Jana. We have a few minutes for discussion of the talk. Anybody? You can raise your hand with the Zoom function, and then I'll give you the opportunity. If there's nothing, I have a question regarding the integration of topic modeling and the rest. How much effort did it take to integrate the components, network analysis, topic analysis, and so on?
That's a good question. Well, I think it's an effort, but still keeping in mind that I'm a PhD student, so to speak, or it's my PhD project. The goal really is working in digital humanities, right? To dive into different methodological approaches. And I think basically that's where I see the main value in computation methods, is that if we use them for the humanities, we have to adapt them and change them a little bit, so to speak. And so I think the main goal is, or the main objective is really combining different approaches. In general, I would always recommend it. I mean, you also use topic modeling, so you probably have also something to say about that. It just gives you a different form of reading. Yeah. I don't like the term distant reading. I like the term scalable reading that also Andreas Vickers uses a lot, so that we have different varieties at how we can look at our data.
Okay. Question by KLAMMT, please.
Yes, thank you. A striking presentation, very, very interesting. I especially liked very much the approach to combine German and English names for the same question mark that is not really the same. This is, I think, very interesting for every one of us working between two, at least two different languages and countries. And I was also very interested about that you applied also images that I'm working in Art Historian Institute. It's quite interesting for us too. So do you have an idea of in future, maybe not in the PhD thesis, to apply also automatic image recognition and some kind of topic modeling on different kinds of illustration in newspapers, because I think this is the treasure in newspapers, which is not, until now, not really, we don't get really ahead on this.
Yeah, that's an excellent question. I know somebody, his name is Ben Lee. He's at the University of Washington, Seattle. He has also worked in Chronicling America for the Library of Congress, and he is using machine learning to identify images, so image recognition. I can forward you all of his work so far. And it's very interesting there because, I mean, I didn't expect it so much, you know, to have a lot of many images that also come with the text. And I look at, so my main goal is, right, to look also not only at reprinted text, but especially to look at how do these texts change over time. And a further component is not only the textual properties, but of course the images. And it's very interesting, especially in terms of when you look at advertisements, they are very image heavy. And very often, depending on the political, social, and economic environment of the respective publication location, you will see the same ad, but in a junction, so to speak, or in conjunction with different images. I'm not doing that, let's say, on a computation level for my PhD, because that would really surpass everything. But it's a very different or interesting approach. And well, I hope in the sense that when I publish my data set, that maybe other researchers can focus on that. Thank you, Anne.
Okay. Good. So time's up for this talk. That's also why I kind of skipped the introduction. We have a lot of talks and let's use the time for them. And I'm the next speaker. So Francois has already, our director has already said that I'm a senior research fellow at the German Institute of Japanese Studies. And let me share the slides. Okay. Can you see the slides?
Yep. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. So I'm today giving a talk on the datafication as it can be observed in the speeches of the Japanese Diet, and using for this topic modeling that Jana has also referred to. My talk is divided in 3 parts and a conclusion. The outline, the application, how I operationalize techniques and the results, and the conclusion drawn together. First, to topic modeling. It is a text mining method that takes into account that words can have multiple meanings. Technically, it's a mixed membership model. The informal algorithm for that is that the user is asked for stop words, that is which words to ignore, and how many topics he or she wants. This number has to be given in the beginning. Then the words are converted into a bag of words, means the different words and their multiplicities. And for Japanese especially, which is an agglutinated languages without spaces, we cannot simply take words where they stop, where the space sign is. They are reduced to their basic forms. Conjugation is removed. In English, gone would become go, and so on. Then n topics are generated for this bag of words. And the structure of the result is that the documents are constituted by topic proportions, which add up to 1. The words as strings can belong to different topics, but the word instances in the documents belong only to 1 topic. And the stable topics are, for instance, discourse analysis categories. According to grounded theory, there are multiple aspects where this can be fit into this rather versatile algorithm. Specifically, LDA topic modeling. This is a visualization for that. The words in the documents are parsed according to a statistical model, and each document becomes a bar graph, you could say. And additionally, we have a list of topics. You see that on the left. So the tool that I use is developed at the University of Halle, so-called Topic Explorer, which is specifically constructed in order to analyze Japanese language corpora. Here you see big in the line above. I entered big, and it shows that there are 2 topics to which this word is allotted to. And here we see big. It's the big from big data. And with this interface, we can browse all the documents, of which there are quite many, as I will tell you soon. Then it's like a browser. You can click at a text, and then you can click at a topic, and then the most relevant texts are opened. For example, all the texts where the word big is used in the sense of topic 7. Here. If we open the text, then you have something that looks like the scheme before, where the graphs were generated. Here we have the data that became the foundation for generating the topic, annotated. And importantly, like for Jana, we can go back to the original texts. Here, the corpus is composed of speeches in the national diet, and we can go back to the viewer of the national diet, which is provided. Now to data and data. Data is the standard translation for the English word data, but it doesn't come out one-to-one. Data has to do with information, but not in the way that Joho has to do with data. Joho is the Japanese word mostly translated as information. And for example, the German European General Data Protection Regulation contains the word data, but the corresponding law is called Personal Information Protection Law. So simply looking at the word data wouldn't bring us very far. And as a preliminary, let's look into a famous dictionary, an important dictionary. 2 meanings are given for data. And these could be similar for the Western data. One is facts that were gathered to make an argument They contain information in order to make a judgment. Another one is, in computers, material that has been turned into symbols and numbers, data transmission, etc. And now the promise of big data, which kind of is the reason why everybody talks about big data today, is that if you gather data, you can extract patterns from that. There are all kinds of complexities involved in that, but this is how Facebook makes money and so on. A lot of things can be said on that, but yeah, let's just look at what role topic models can play. So in the application, I construct the corpus for the time between 2011 and 2021, first half. It contains the time slightly before the accident in Fukushima and another quite interesting accident on social media data leakage. The first idea is get the speeches in there from the Japanese Diet, which contain the word data. These are already 30,000 documents, 30,000 speech contributions, but only these texts that would not suffice. As I said, the protection law is on information, not on data. So instead, I use a corpus which takes similar words also in there. Shiryo, which means material, yoken, which means given, the Latin cognate of data, and jo, information. This brings it up to 160,000 documents. And this, of course, cannot be read completely, but I employ topic modeling. So what parameters do I use? I use nouns only. So everything else is stop word except for nouns. I use 50 topics. The patterns emerge most clearly in that case. And I only use words that are present at least 50 times. Data and information and so on, they are in there multiple thousands of times, but nevertheless, I bet on the fact that the algorithm can sort the things out. And indeed, if I generate 12 topic models with the same parameters, we see that there is a stability. Data is allocated to exactly one topic. This is the case in 8 times, or exactly 2 topics. This is the case 4 times. And in the latter case, the 2 topics correspond to the 2 meanings in the dictionary. So the algorithm really detects what is in there semantically. Now let's look into the interface. You see both topics are greenish, very closely related to each other. But yeah, in the left, there are words regarding statistics, for example. And in the left, it's system, usage, digital, and so on. It's really the other meaning from the dictionary. And now we can, in the topic model, in the topic explorer, look by week, which were the most used words, which of the 2 topics is there more than the other one. Can, for example, look for weeks where data was discussed in the one sense, but not in the other, and so on. This week, for example, it was discussed more in the digital sense. And now, lastly, on datafication, we can extract texts that contain a high ratio of both data-related topics. So they are both on the digital aspect and on gathering material, making an argument. For example, 2014, we have a inside of a speech problem on data sharing with spreadsheet software. Formats have to be revised and so on. And another text is regarding barrier-free reading. the person there says that it is necessary for publishers to provide the text data in a way that the visually impaired people can also read that. And we can also find working statistics and rich discourses on them. For example, if something got lost, then if we look into the viewer of the national diet, other members of the diet put forth very different and very rich critiques. So we can find discourses on datafication by employing tools like that, a tool like that. Now I come to the conclusion, the topic models show sufficient reproducibility in my use case. They indeed detect patterns that are supposed to be there, especially the two meanings of data. And the division into topics helps to identify especially interesting texts, but sometimes it is still necessary to work in the database backend, like for identifying texts that have a high percentage of both topics. So it's still not for broad usage, I would say. Thank you very much. Yes. So anybody have a comment? Can raise your hand. Okay. Jana, please.
Yeah, I'm not sure if I missed that point. Can you explain again how or why do you decided on the number 50 as regards to topics?
Yeah, the spectral division comes out there best. If I would have too little topics, the data wouldn't be divided into these two different topics, or it would be all over the place. Consider it like a lens where you have to fine-tune so that the patterns emerge, like 2 lines or 1 line. This is one of the heuristics that I employed, and it doesn't always show one topic and it doesn't always show 2 topics, but really the division into these 2 kind of diffraction patterns.
And so I give the question also back to you. How long did it take for you to figure that out?
Well, trying around for different talks in different contexts. What can I present about, and so on. And in the end, I really found out that this is really a value, some value that is added by this algorithm.
Thank you. Yeah, and I think it's also a good point in that sense, because you can let other people, or you can show your data to other people and maybe have a second opinion on that. Thank you, Harald.
Franz was first, but Benjamin Beuerle is kind of external and perhaps has the more non-standard thing to say. Yes.
Thanks a lot. I was just, and maybe it's a naive question because I'm less familiar just with these kind of tools, but we heard the talk by Andreas Flickers last week, where he talked about the necessary combination of data literacy on the one hand and hermeneutics on the other hand. So I was wondering, at which point in the research then come the hermeneutics in? Is what you present here, you find interesting texts through these tools, and then you start with the hermeneutics. So these tools are a precondition, or what you do with these tools is a precondition for the hermeneutics. Is that like I should imagine it, or is that?
Well, the approach that I had in the beginning was a blended reading, going back and forth from the distant reading to the single texts, and then extracting the different frames, discursive frames. That was the beginning that I, kind of the point where I undertook the journey. And right now I would say it is like this. This is a pattern that is in that appears in the data that can be interpreted according to the properties of the algorithm. And yes, I would have to make this into a certain portion. Why are these texts interesting? Yes, they have to do with datafication, but this is something, this is rather, yes, a detection. This is the place in a larger hermeneutical process, an aspect. Anything? Franz?
Yeah, so I was wondering, I mean, it's a question to both of you. On the one hand, of course, you learn a lot about the tool, no? So you're applying these corpora, and you learn about the tool, what the tool is able to do. On the other hand, by applying the tool, you want to learn something about the corpora, about what is in the corpora. How do you balance the two? I mean, are these two different research objectives, or how do you balance them, and which kind of objective comes first?
Yeah, so this was supposed to be part in going through one discursive frame after the other. You have read the dissertation of Laura Bleken, but it's not as easy as that. And another way of using topic modeling is the one that I presented right now, in finding texts that are interesting from the viewpoint of datafication. And this can only, or importantly, be identified by this. It is kind of a side project right now, or something to put in another paper, something like that. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Jana?
Yeah, I would say for me, they both are similarly important. Because as a digital humanist, I want to understand as much how a method works, and I want to develop new methods, so to speak. And I think because we are still in a time, I don't know if we would have the same discussion in 50 years or so, where a lot of people don't know about the individual computational methods in your field. And so I think it is also our duty to learn to understand them and to explain them in a way that non-computational scholars, that in order for them to understand that. And this means taking it much more as our objective, as maybe non-computational work would look like.
Thank you. Thank you.
Time's up for me. And now we go east to Moscow, to Esther MEIER and Sebastian KINDLER. Introductions take time. Esther is the scientific coordinator of the project Soviet and German Prisoners of War and Internees. And Sebastian is a research fellow at that project. And yes, I give the floor to you.
Okay, thank you very much, Harald, and also to the colleagues in Tokyo for the invitation. We will present you our German-Russian project, Soviet and German Prisoners of War and Internees. I will start and give you a brief overview of our work in the archives, our project goals, and our partners. Sebastian then will talk about how we index the documents and import the data and the digitized material into databases. That's probably what you are interested in most. Within the project, within the framework of the project, the German Historical Institute in Moscow is responsible only for the Soviet POWs and therefore today we will consider only the work on the Soviet prisoners of war. During the Second World War, up to 5.7 million Soviet soldiers and officers were taken prisoners of war by the Wehrmacht. More than 3 million died in German captivity. They starved to death, died of the consequences of forced labor, were shot, abused for medical experiments, and some also were gassed. The German treatment of Soviet POWs was one of the major war crimes of the Second World War, but the fate of the Soviet prisoners of war remained publicly unaddressed for decades in Germany, in East and in West, as well as in the Soviet Union and in Russia. As a result of this, the names of many Soviet prisoners of war are still unknown today. In 2016, our project was launched by a joint declaration of the foreign ministers of Russia and Germany, Sergei Lavrov and Frank-Walter Steinmeier. The aim of the project is to reconstruct individual biographies. For this, we work with a small team in Russian, German, and also other international archives. Next slide, Sebastian, please. We are searching for German documents. Here you have an example. It's a personal card from a Soviet prisoner of war. The Wehrmacht registered the Soviet POs in the camps, and for every prisoner, such a card should be filled in. This is a card from the ZAMO, from the archive of the Russian Ministry of Defense. And we also work, of course, with Soviet documents such as filtration files. Next slide, please. Filtration files are documents of the NKVD, of the Secret Service, who screened those prisoners of war who had survived German captivity. The Soviet state treated with suspicion all those who had been outside its control and who had been in contact with the enemy. So here we have an example of an ankieta, a questionnaire from the National Archives of Latvia in Riga. Why are we doing all this? Our project has three main objectives. First, to clarify the fate of as many prisoners of war as possible. This is, of course, a very big challenge considering the large number of prisoners. The results of our work and the databases are used both in Germany and in Russia to provide information for relatives who are still looking for prisoners of war, who are looking for their grandfathers or also grandmothers. We also had women in the Red Army, as you know. And secondly, the documents open up new approaches for historical research. Many documents become accessible for the first time. And thirdly, our project also contributes to the remembrance of the Soviet prisoners of war. We are also involved in exhibition projects who are working with biographies. Our project can only succeed in close Russian-German cooperation. Most of the personal cards on Soviet POWs are stored in Russian and other post-Soviet archives. This is not only true for Soviet documents, but also of the documents of the Wehrmacht. On the Russian side, our project is coordinated by the Russian Ministry of Defense, and on the German side by the Volksbund, the German War Graves Commission. In Russia, ELAR, that's an abbreviation for Electronic Archives, is our partner and is operating the database OBD Memorial. And in Germany, we are working with the database Memorial Archives, which now will be presented by Sebastian. So I give the floor to you, Sebastian.
Thank you, Esther. My task now is to take you on a rather quick and rough journey through the rest of our process of both digitization of the documents and the extraction of relevant information from said documents. After successfully recovering relevant documents with biographical data of Soviet POWs, the next step consists of digitizing the complete paper document. An important guideline with regard to the digitization process is the DFG Practical Guidelines on Digitization, published by the German Research Foundation. We try to follow those as close as possible, but they are not entirely set in stone. You may wonder, why is that? Well, as you already have heard, the project works in different archives in several countries, and as a consequence, there are both legal restrictions and technical circumstances that determine how the digitization process can be carried out in the end. But by following this rule set, the total amount of digitized pages right now is around 1.5 million and still counting. After finishing the digitization process, the last of our main tasks still remains. The information needs to be transferred from the document to a database environment. In our particular case, we even need to integrate the information into two separate databases. Our Russian partners use OBD Memorial, a database operated by the Russian Ministry of Defense, while the German side chose Memorial Archives, a platform established by the Flossenbürg concentration camp Memorial. But as both databases are being fed the exact same data, the workflow for extracting information is the same nonetheless. The extraction of information is done separately for every document, which means that for each digital copy we get at least one dataset in the process. Why is it at least one dataset? Well, in some cases we process documents like transport lists where information about several different POWs is saved. To keep track of every individual fate, we need an own dataset for each person mentioned within one document. Let's now have a look at the document Esther already used as an example before, the Personal Card 1, and see how it is represented within Memorial Archives. In the top area, you find the archival information to make sure the origin of the document is known and can be tracked at any time. In the next segment, you can find the digital copy of the document itself. It is selectable and can be opened in a viewer to have a closer look at. Then there is the actual dataset with all the extract information at the bottom part of the page. The most important rule set for extracting the information is to not change anything in the process. Every entry is transferred into the database just as it appears on the document, without any correction or interpretation of the text. Although it is not possible for us to extract each bit of information and to make it search and findable within Memorial Archives, no piece of information is lost in the end. By providing the digital copy, users can easily search for additional information in the document that is not searchable yet. Now I would like to switch to the second example, the questionnaire from a filtration file, to give an example why for us it is mandatory to organize our data on several different levels. Here you can see the document dataset of the questionnaire, which is the foundation of the database. It contains all the raw data that was extracted. But together, to compare and to complement information about one individual POW from different source documents, those different document datasets are merged on the top level, the so-called victim dataset, that is directly connected to the document, as you can see here, and is always only one click away. Each of those victim datasets stands for an individual POW and gives an overview about all the information and every source document that is available for that particular person. In the victim dataset, we also have the possibility to display an interpretation of the raw data from the documents, which means that, for example, names or geographical locations can be presented in a standardized way. As the different documents from a filtration file sometimes are related to each other, we noticed that it would be possible, that it would be useful to make this connection visible in some way as well. As you can see here, we added another optional layer into our data structure, the file layer, which identifies documents that belong to one specific file. Just one last sentence with regard to the intended use of the database. For both users who would like to get information about the fate of individuals, for example relatives, and as well researchers who would like to get access to information about larger groups of POWs. The database will provide many different options to conduct both basic and advanced searches through every existing data field. That's it for now. We're looking forward to your questions and comments and would like to thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Sebastian and Esther. I could understand it. It took a bit of effort, but I think, yeah, I have a question, but Ina first. So wait a second, please. I'll give you the mic. Okay, you can.
Okay, thank you. Perfect. Thank you so much. Sebastian, thank you. Hi again. It was difficult to understand you, so maybe if you maybe said that already.
I'm sorry for that. I didn't see the chat.
No, don't worry. It was just echo. Anyway, so I didn't really understand. So you have transcriber or you have an automatic text recognition? How does it work?
We use manual transcription. We both have an internal team of people who do that, and we use external service providers where we can say, buy this service. But for us, the experience has shown that the more complex a document is, for example, filtration files are the most complex documents we encountered right now, the less satisfied we are with the quality that comes back from a bot transcription service. So that's where our team is sitting on.
May I ask another question? What do you do with ambiguous data? Because I am working on Luxembourg soldiers in the Wehrmacht, and we have a lot of ambiguous data, not just geolocations, birth dates, death date, well, date of death, etc. And our system works only, it has like one statement for one person, one name, one birth date. But this is for us very, very difficult how to interpret, which date to take and how do you work with that? Because I can imagine that on this POW cards, there are many, many mistakes as well. And do you have do you check maybe the date with some personal dossier from the Red Army, or how do you deal with that?
We have, like I said, we have source documents from many different sources, and of course the data is not always fitting. That's why we have the first stage, like I told, the base is the raw document data set where the information is stored like it was given on the document, and the interpretation is done later when it comes to the victim file. There we normally, if there is just one date available, it is handed over automatically. If there are two different dates, for example, then we have to make a decision. The decision usually happens manually based on the different document types. There are some experiences already which document type is more credible when it comes, for example, for birth dates or the spelling of names. But there is no automatic way in doing this for us now.
Let me ask in this question, in this context, the model that the data can be put into, how did you develop the model, and which heuristic did you take? Because he said you don't want to interpret the data in one instance, so it needs thorough design, I can imagine, the database.
Well, in the Memorial Archive, it is not an infrastructure that was built specifically for us. The Flossenbürg concentration camp memorial used that for their own purposes, for their prisoners, but as well for archival material. So there was the experience that was, at least I can say, given to us, and we had the possibility to modify it. But there is not, we didn't have to write an own model for that.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So I think one very short question, perhaps. There is something. If not, we have after all the talks a bit of time to go here and there. So let's go to Rome, to Jörg HÖRNSCHEMEYER, I'm very sorry, who is somebody who has studied computer science for the humanities and German philology and history at the University of Cologne, one of the relatively few persons in, at least in my group of acquaintances who has studied this, and he's since 2010 research associate at the German Historical Institute in Rome. Please, Jörg.
Yeah, Harald, thank you much for this kind introduction. Do you see my slides?
Yes.
Okay. Yes, today in my presentation, I would like to focus on some aspects of the digital transformation at our institute here in Rome. So my presentation is also a little bit of a summarization of what we did, what we actually do, and what may be the challenges for us in the future. But let's start with our own digital history. Computers have been used at the German Historical Institute since the rise of low-cost personal computers in the 1980s, primarily as tools to improve analog workflows in a research-related context, as you can see here. Early typesetting software, such as Two-Step, the Tübingen system of text processing tools developed in the 70s, for example, were used quite early to create scientific registers and other text, especially resource-intensive large-scale projects like the Repertorium Germanicum, a project that has been collecting prosopographical data from the Vatican archives since the end of the 19th century. At this early stage, however, the output remained analog for many more years. This changed, of course, with another important milestone of the digital turn, the World Wide Web. It became quickly the key technology for the presentation and publication of sources and other historical data, and so also for us. In addition to the mandatory Institute's homepage, research projects could now easily make their collected data available to a broader audience. One of our first online projects was the presence of German military units in Italy between 43 and 45. Which lists Italian places where German troops were present. Here you can see this very early interface, simple but also easy to understand and to use even today. Since about 2005 then, also scholarly digital editions have played an important role. One of the first projects in this field was the digital edition of the nuntial reports of Cesare Orsenigo. With everything that is still today a core component of a digital edition, like XML-based data management and a modular client-server architecture, but in design and functionality very much oriented to traditional printed editions. Then a phase began where we tried to make better use of the specific possibilities of the new medium, as you can see here with the example of the nuntial reports of Eugenio Pacelli, the follow-up project of Orsenigo. This apparatus at the left you see is a traditional method of text criticism to describe the genetic process within one document. For example, the genesis of a nuntial report from its first draft to the final report. With the new browser-based possibilities, we transformed this into an interactive colored layer of presentation, much more intuitive and easier to use. We also try to use new possibilities of interlinking cartographic information with text transcriptions, as you see here in the digital edition of a travelogue of the botanist Georg Wilhelm Schimper, which was a cooperation project with the German Historical Institute in London. In addition to those interfaces, which first have the human user in mind, we recognized also a growing demand for machine-readable interfaces. More and more emphasis is being placed on transparency and reusability of data. We know this from the NFDI or NFDE initiatives and the discussions about fair data. And also we try to respond to this. For the first time, we have paid greater attention to the machine-readable interfaces with RESTful APIs. The correspondence APIs built for the digital edition of the letters of Ferdinand Gregorovius illustrates this well. This interface could be used for a granular access to the letters, persons, works, places, and even the text-critical commentaries. In addition, it supports also the so-called correspondence metadata interchange format, so one can use the data for further analysis in larger letter networks with the help of tools like Corresp Search. The API also provides a GND beacon interface that connects our data with the authority files of the National Library and other projects using the same data like other digital editions. In the future, we would like to offer all of our data not only in human readable form, but also with the help of such interfaces for distant reading approaches. For example, to make the Repertorium Germanicum accessible also for data-driven analysis, as we have tried here in a little use case where we transformed our registers to simple CSV files so that everyone can use it with tools like Gephi or Gephi, for example, and analyze this kind of clerical networks. Or, like already mentioned by you, Harald, and Jana, to use topic models for clustering the data and for a better information retrieval. Or to analyze Pacelli's Nuncio reports with regard to similarities in style and content. This is a little use case of a stylometric analysis of Pacelli's letters. He wrote to different addressees. It suggests that he wrote differently to certain addressees than to others. Another important point we also noticed recently is the value of data from older projects. Today, we can reuse the manually annotated data of the older volumes of the Repertorium Germanicum from the early 80s, as you can see here in the top of the slide. In blue, you see the character marks after the transformation to XML that were used for extracting names, places, and institutions for the printed registers. Today, we can train now, for example, named entity recognition models with exactly the same data and benefit a lot of these automatic labeling in our current projects. Or we can present and analyze older data sets with new tools, using again the example of the project mentioned earlier, the presence of German military units in Italy. Here we first georeferenced locations mentioned in this project using data sets from the Italian Statistical Institute and Wikidata. Then we merged them with another data set of identified locations of acts of violence committed by the Nazis and fascists that we got from our cooperation partners. And now we could build virtual overlays of them. Of course, in the future, this kind of approaches will require more discussions of how such data aggregations must be set in the right context in order to avoid false interpretations. The question here is, what do we want to show with these kinds of interfaces? Not all of these overlapping points on the map have a clearly causal relationship. We've heard similar things from Professor Fickers a week ago. We need discussions about data, tool, and interface criticism. We are sure that we will have to deal with these things more in the future. For distance reading approaches, we need to provide well-curated data. But at the same time, we should not forget explorative, human-usable interfaces for close reading approaches. And we also have an obligation to the public to make the results and our methods transparent and to communicate them in an understandable way, also to non-DH and non-data experts. And last but not least, we must not forget older projects. We should enrich them with more data, migrate them, and keep them accessible in the future. because also this can help us to produce new knowledge. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Jörg. We have quite some time for discussion. Anybody wants to go first? Okay, Anne. First.
Yeah, one moment. Yeah, thank you very much. Yeah, this is very, very impressive, I have to say, especially as this really shows the history of digital humanities also, because two-step, I already wrote it down in the chat. This is really a darling of digital humanities. It's a very old program and it's still working. This is very amazing. And if you think of your own software you used in your daily work in the office, you only can dream of such an interoperability. But what I'm interested in, because you can imagine that we have a lot of similar challenges, I want to frame this. Do you have an idea about how to document this curational work you do on the data and on the graphical user interfaces? Because this really are a kind of re-edition of data, and that meant that the impression you get from the data might be very different from year to year or from step to step of this curational process. What kind of ideas do you have about this? I know there are maybe no solutions, but ideas.
Oh, thank you very much. This is a good question. I don't know if I can answer this in a satisfying way. So our first approach is, yes, we recognized also that documentation and that curation has to play a bigger role in our daily development of such digital editions and all the stuff. And we tried to focus this challenge, for example, in that way that we accessible our completely open source our codes in a source open GitHub repository that is well documented. So the software of the first software of the actual ongoing Gregorovius edition is online on a GitHub server. It's very good documented. It is an test-driven development approach. It is you can use it by your own. You can change it, and of course, all like that. But that maybe is not the question of the documentation of workflows. You're right, and of the data curation. I think that will be a topic of your talk also, right? Yeah, you're right. What should we do with older data that we curate and rebuild in another way that changes, and how could we document this? It's a good question. You are right. There is no standard tool to do this, but I think we only have to have this in mind. And I don't know if something like that, like a great ontology-based project of this is the right thing to do this. Maybe it's a little bit more that we have to disciplinize ourselves to do that and to make it available also in such open source repositories, for example, like Zenodo, or where we can put our data. Likewise, we do it with our source code on GitHub. But I can't, I'm afraid I can't give you a satisfying answer.
Mareike?
Yes, thank you very much. Actually, it goes straight in the same direction. So thanks, Jörg. It was really impressive to see what you've done at the institute in Rome, and to give us the historical background of where you actually came from. And I wanted to say more or less the same than Anne, but I was more interested in the data than in the code, because we all in front of the same problems, and we also have these older projects that we still think that are very worthy, and we want to still be able to use them. But having said that, you can't update all the web presentation and curate the data and so on. It's so much work that it's difficult actually to do that, and it's not it's not so well seen as well. You can't get funding for that. You can only get funding if you do something new and great, and which is a pity, because data often is there's been so much energy and work going into it, especially in the older projects, because you had to do it all by yourself and it wasn't automated. So my question was, what we need to do with our data now is we put it on Zenodo, on a repository with an open Creative Commons license. And I was wondering if you also do that with your data. You mentioned just Zenodo, and or if you have another repository, because that's also a problem where to put it. It's historical data. Do we need a repository for ourselves, or can we just put it at least somewhere and save the data if we can't save the web page? So separate the two layers.
Okay, yeah, thank you very much. You're completely right. I think maybe it should be the approach data first, you can say. And we have to transform our older data, because the data is not all very well documented. It's not all in standard formats like the TEI or something like that. It is sometimes they are local XML formats, or other even worse, not documented PDF structures of tooltips and something like that. It's yeah, but I think our attention should be first on this, to transform the data, and then you're completely right to put this in repositories where researchers can use it. And there, yeah, we have the opportunity of Zenodo, what is I think a very open repository for all sciences. And of course we have also the discipline repositories of Claria or Daria or something like that, and you are in this maybe much more in your field of research. I don't know what we should prefer. Maybe there's also interconnection between these repositories. I think I would prefer this Zenodo also, because it has a little bit of a broader use, or a wider yeah, something, yeah, I would say.
Okay. Any other questions? If not, then let's proceed further to the west, to Paris. And we have two institutes in Paris who are presenting, the Historical Institute and the Art Historical Institute. Who wants to go first?
Mareike. I think I was designated to go first.
Okay, so Mareike KÖNIG, she is a Deputy Director and Head of the Digital Humanities Department and the Library of the German Historical Institute, Paris. Please, Mareike.
So, okay, I hope you can hear me now, because that was a bit difficult. Yeah, thank you very much, Harald, for organizing this really interesting, well, for us afternoon, for you late evening today. So I'm going to present now a platform, an infrastructure for the humanities and social sciences, and it's the blog platform Hypothèse. It started in France, that's why I pronounce it in French. You can also say hypothesis in the German way, or hypothesis for the English speaking. So the Max Weber Foundation is now taking care of the German branch of this platform, together with Open Edition, or Open Edition, which is our French partner. And I would just quickly have some words on how the project started, since I'm also a historian. I like to look back and on the platform and its services. And then I will briefly present some results of a large survey among German academic bloggers that we conducted in 2018-2019. So you might think that blog is actually a thing of the beginning millennium and that it is outdated right now. Well, that is not the case. At least that's what I want to show you in the next 10 minutes, even though, of course, academic blogging has changed a lot over the years. So here you see the landing page of the German platform. It started in 2009. It's based on WordPress, a free and open source content management system that is widely used on the internet for web pages. I think actually it is the most used system. And the idea back then was to get a higher visibility for academic blogs. If they weren't just solo somewhere out there on the internet, but grouped together under one roof, that was the main aim, but also actually to achieve more discussion and exchange if the blogs were together under one platform, and to start building a community of practice aiming for open access. And the idea came actually from the American blog platforms back then. And of course, the French portal then was supposed to highlight the importance of French academic blogging and research, and the language played an important role. As for the content, I'll show you the English landing page. The idea was to place academic themes and subjects in the center, and not the individual scientist or his or her personality, as you could find often at the beginning of blogging. The academic blogger on the platform should write about his or her research, about ongoing projects, on books they read, on articles they discover, and so on, but not about themselves and not so much about personal stuff. In this view, that was the idea. Blogs actually were the missing link between the unseen parts somehow, between the raw material, so notes that researchers take and so on, and the traditional research output, the publication where things are really already. So consequently, the French colleagues called the blogs carnet de recherche. And carnet de recherche you can translate actually with research notebooks or research journals. And this idea was to have a higher acceptance amongst the scholars, because then blogging was still seen as something revolutionary in science, that of course made possible by the easy accessibility of publication media from the turning of the millennium onwards. Researchers could, with the social media, take over the decision when, where, and what to publish. And that was really a spectacular move. That was quite new. And this, we tend to forget it because it has become so normal and ubiquitous. So with calling the blogs research notebooks, something that actually every researcher has or does, the French colleagues stressed the tradition in scholarly writing and not so much the disruptive elements. And that was also in order to raise acceptance for blogging. The name was changed later on. By the way, it's no longer necessary to go this strategic way. Now in here you see its hypothesis, academic blogs. So, and the success was there. Hold on, now I have to switch over to my slide. You can see the statistics. The platform grew rapidly, the number of blogs, the number of articles, the number of comments, and so on. And to join the platform, one had only, and still has, to have an affiliation to a university or any research institution. The platform and its services are for researchers only. This is due to funding reasons, of course, but also to ensure the quality of the blogs. So while it is certainly actually very easy to set up your own blog on WordPress, which with several clicks, the advantage of the platform and its services are manifold. Hypothesis is a non-commercial platform, first of all. So there is no advertising like on most of other free pages. You fill in the form and the team in Marseille sets up the blog for you. So this is here by your blog. Just click there and you can fill in the form. So the technical team does all updates, all new installations of plugins, all data privacy regulations, so all kinds of things that are in general very annoying for individual researchers, especially if they do not have any technical knowledge and no ambition to work on that. Once the blog is set up and running, we ask for an ISSN number for the blogs. So blogs are actually treated just as any other journal in Germany since I think it was 2013. And the URL of the blogs, of course, are persistent. The content of the blogs is archived also by the French National Library in order to ensure their long-term findability, and so increasing their value as part of the academic discourse. So to put it in a nutshell, the researchers can concentrate on the content, whereas the team of Open Edition takes care of all technical points and issues. And now for the German side, the Max Weber Stiftung provides the community management. I go back to the German part here of our German-speaking community. So there's training session webinars for an easy start, as well as ongoing support in the scholars' blogging journey, like search engine optimization. We also assist scholars in creating a vision for their blog, the community management broadcasts the blogs through social media. It's mainly on Twitter and Facebook. And we create the landing page that you can see here with the best articles that we find during a day that we just curate here. And then up in the slider, you have those twice a week, those that we consider actually being the most interesting and the best articles to read just right now. So normally the slider just runs through. Open Edition has a catalog of blogs, and you can use it in order to find subject that you're interested. For you, the interface is in French and in English, so you can just click on the catalog and go through the subjects. So the platform managed actually to find answers to the 3 most read prejudices and barriers concerning blogs. The first one is, yeah, okay, blogs, great, but where do I find them? And so here's like a platform, the roof under which the blogs are all regrouped. And the second is, okay, blogs, but they're going to still be there tomorrow. Can I cite them? And the answer is yes, they have a persistent URL, they get an ISSN, and the content is archived. And the third would be, okay, blogs, but is the content reliable? Is it really academic? And so there the answer is yes, it's only academics who blog on this platform, and it's about academic and research themes that they are blogging about. So meanwhile, there are several thousand blogs actually, and produced by a vast community of bloggers all over the world. I think I've got the slide here. Yes, you can see these are the visits on the platform, and there's over 1 million visits per month on the platform, which is actually more than the National Library in France gets, just to give you an idea. I checked yesterday, and there are 5 blogs from Japan, but they're all in French. No blog is in Japanese, although this is possible, of course. So if you want to, you can become the first person to blog in Japanese on the platform. You can just have to sign up. If you take a look on the platform later on after our session, or tomorrow morning for you rather, you will see the enormous diversity of the blogosphere and the diversity also of existing practices. And it's difficult to choose, but I just thought I'd give you 5 examples of different kinds of blogs. So first, you would have research blogs. So there are research blogs by a program or by a team, like here, the Abi Warburg or the Heidelberg Research Group for Organized Studies. Corporate Crime Studies is actually quite interesting to read. Or Pop History, it's also made by a group of researchers. Then you would have blogs by a single person, mostly on thesis or write a second book. So this is one on text to image, artists in Middle Earth, Tolkien illustrations, or computer linguistic blogs here in Germany. Then you would have blogs that are on for seminars or for events. So this was a symposium that we held at our institute some years ago, where we also had an open peer review for the publication run on the blog afterwards. And this is a research and teaching project, because you can then let your students actually try blogging as well. Or Digital History Berlin, that's one of the latest blogs we have for the Digital History Chair that's in Berlin, and for their seminar. And then there's blogs on sources or on methods. So this is just one from our colleagues in Washington, href on source projects, or digital humanities methods and tools, and so on. There's many more from blogs from libraries, blogs accompanying a publication, field research blogs from archaeologists, media blogs, blogs on a current topic, and so on. So I just invite you to have a look on the platform. And to finish this quick presentation, I just want to talk about that survey I was mentioning. So if you're interested to read it, you find the URL here, and I can post it in the chat afterwards. And we wanted to know more after 7 years of existence about our bloggers, and it was an anonymous online survey, and the results were quite interesting. And here just some highlights. So the most active in academic blogging are early and mid-career researchers with a fairly even gender distribution, which is good, I would say. So it's almost 30% of all bloggers have been employed in academia for over 13 years. So it's not the newcomers, but those who are already in academia for a while, and those who can still actually gain something for their career at blog. And the results also refute the common bias that scholars use blogs as an easy publication, making blogs a place where anyone can write about everything without any quality control. Instead, we found out that the full 72% of all the bloggers agreed with the statement, I plan my blog's content very carefully. So evidently, humanities bloggers don't just do it, but they use blogs strategically. And similarly, the survey results give reasons to question the bias that academic blogs lack quality control. Because indeed, at least half of the bias is unfounded, given that almost 50% of the bloggers do not rely solely on their own knowledge or spelling knowledge. So they just don't just publish, but they report that blog posts go through an editorial check before publication, or they ask a colleague to go and read the post before it goes online. And this observation also goes hand in hand with the trend to blog as a team. Fewer than half of all respondents publish their blogs on their own. The most actually blog as a team with colleagues, or they regularly receive articles by guest contributors. The primary goal listed by the humanities bloggers surveyed here was to use the blog as a means of communication, and mainly targeting an academic audience, 52%. So they're not actually reaching out for a lay public, which is interesting. And most bloggers publish less than one article per month. So it's not at all, if it ever was, a daily publishing workload that you have. And half of the bloggers also said that they spend less than an hour per week into blogging, and the blog posts are about 1 to 2 pages. In contrast, that is actually interesting, that moderate amount of time, academic bloggers invest quite more time into reading other academic blogs. So almost a quarter of respondents said that they read blog several times a week. And to finish off, we also find out that 78% want to have more comments, or 94% of course are very happy to receive comments, but only 29% of bloggers never comment, and 60% comment rarely. So that makes almost up for 90% of bloggers that are not participating in this form of communication, and instead, that's what we found out, the discussion takes place elsewhere, in social media, by email, and mostly in person. So this blogosphere that we can see is not separate cosmos which only exists online, but instead blogs have become a part of a larger academic information space in which on and offline communication overlap. And their bloggers report that the colleagues talk to them about their blog posts, that blog posts are mentioned in lectures or forwarded via email, and that their posts are cited in print and online publication. And thus, for academic bloggers, the blog post success is not measured by its statistical reach, but they view a post as successful when they receive oral feedback on it, which is almost 80%. And I will stop here. And if you're interested, you can find the results online on the Redaktionsblog or under the URL I just posted. So thank you very much, and I hope you're interested and will browse the platform. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Mareike. One thing right from me in the beginning, I am researching discourse on data and also data platforms as part of my research on Japan. And the theoretical problem of managing attention and not having platforms overflow is very, well, one of the most important topics to run any platform. Facebook and Twitter are overflowing with hate or rage bait or something like that, because there's no mechanism, and having people necessarily associated with an institution sounds overly restrictive, but in the end, if people cite these things, they want to have some guarantee by having the researcher commit his reputation to a certain degree and act as a researcher. So that's something that I really like about the platform.
Thank you. Yeah.
Okay, so further questions by other people? You can raise your hand. Chat function. Okay, Franz.
Yeah, thank you very much. And we also produced a blog on with our colleagues in Singapore. You mentioned you invited and especially Japanese scholars. There are some in the audience still, although it's very late here. But how would that work? I mean, they would publish, of course, in English. You wouldn't, or how could you? Maybe you could say a little bit more about this.
Yes, thanks very much. It's actually easy. If you start with an English landing page when it says your blog, and then you have to fill in a form, and you can blog in any language you like. We don't have, for now, we have blogs, Croatian blogs, and we have some Chinese blogs, and we have some Arabic blogs, and we have Russian blogs, also in Russian. So there is quite a diversity, even though it's a small number. And of course English is not a problem, but also the other languages wouldn't be a problem at all. So they just have to go through the process of asking for the blog, which the PDF asks some questions, but it's also to make sure that the people not just click quickly and say I want a blog and then they never use it. So you have to ask some questions and endure it, but it's also to help you to think about what you want to reach with the blog. And they can also write me an email and contact me or contact the Max Weber Foundation, who's actually in charge of the blog if they've got more questions. Yeah.
Okay, well, thank you. I hope the Japanese colleagues hear that and feel encouraged. Yes,
that would be great. Thanks.
Okay, so let's go to the last talk by KLAMMT from the Art Historical Institute in Paris. She's an archaeologist by formation, and since 2020 she is the Director of Research and Head of Digital Humanities at the German Art Historical Institute in Paris. Anne, please.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for having me. I try to do this the resting minutes and to give you a short overview about my ongoing research project that is repurposing research data, and the case study is Deutsch-Französische Kunstvermittlung. Well, what is it about? The objective in a nutshell is really the question, how can we foster the reuse of a 20-year-old data collection in scholarly research in the humanities, or to narrow this down, really in art history. So we can subdivide or derivate two questions from this. How can we create access points for users that they're never anticipated? And how can we reuse research data without violating its integrity and still properly credit the data curator's work? I could talk at length about this database for sure. I try to be very short about this, but it needs to be sketched a bit. It is really, this database goes back to the early days of the DFK Paris, my institution, and it emerged in really 1990. The research question was very much related to those years ago. The idea to write a history of artistic relations between France and Germany in journalistic art criticism. And the end of this was really divided in 3 sub-projects, and each of these sub-projects produced a database. Altogether, this is not about big data, Altogether, they comprise 6,700 textual entries that refers to articles and snippets in 302 periodicals and a few books. So a characteristic of this is really a free-in-one database. And what is important about it is has multilingual entries in French and in German. The teams were based in Paris and in Berlin, and the teams changed a lot, and as there several people took part in this, quite often people writing their PhD, and you will find a lot of names now in the broader context of art history and also of digital art history. So this project seems to be of some importance for the history of art history. Each of the records in the database refers to a textual contribution reflecting art criticism in German-French interrelationships, like exhibition reviews, travelogues, a reference to monographic articles. And the information included in a data record is the author of this contribution, the title. These are sometimes not titles you will find in the journal because these are really snippets from huge articles. All the bibliographic information. A description by this entry is interesting. How does this article relate to the research question of the project? Quotations sometimes. A list of persons involved, sometimes mentioned in the article or sometimes involved in the exhibition mentioned in the article. And some kinds of, you can say, topic tagging according to the text type, the rubric, or something like you may call keywords, but you can also say the researchers tagged subjects they found interesting in this. So this is highly individual stuff. The current state of this database is this database was never published until 2019, and then on the website of the DFK Paris. And there it was really not so much about open this for the public, but very much about safeguarding this database that was really confined to software that was not, we could not maintain anymore, and it was condemned to die with our servers. So this was a safeguard project. And saying this meant there was not much resources available to enrich the data or to check them much, and it was an access human readable only at that point. So talking about this, we suggested it would be, it is important, as Jörg already underlined, to have more points of access. And we have suggested communities of future use, which we determined as humans doing mostly traditional qualitative research. And this is very important for art history and for the people using our website. So for them, the graphical user interface, a good graphical user interface is important. Then we have another community that I would say are digital humanists or humans working more digital, following along quantitative or data-driven approaches, and are interested, as we think, in the graphical user interface to get an impression from the data, but also in APIs and in dumps at the repository so that they can take the data and process them in tools like we've seen today. And there will be, as we think, a third group that are humans harvesting information with machines, and with machines not doing this autonomous, but not always surveyed. And for them, the graphical user interface will be interesting, but only if we open this for semantic publishing. But this is future work. We are not currently, they're not working on this. So first of all, we started to redo our graphical user interface according to two main principles. This was firstly very economically thought, but also for the users. But we reuse as much as possible of our own UX design, in particular the UX design we applied on the research tool of the project Own Reality. And what is for us interesting and important to apply optical differentiation, differentiation you can understand as human immediately, of the semantic layers within the data. And now I have to do a little bit of work. So here is our prototype of this new appearance. We will have a new kind of landing page. In the landing page, you find something like Recherche. And you can, in a graphical user interface, you will have several ways to facet the data according to persons mentioned, authored, or from where these data are, from which kind of which sub-project. So if we go to a research result, I will change to one that is it's a bit more. When you will find the optical differentiation I talked about by all the bibliographic informations and what are concerning really is from the sources, from the articles on the white background. And on a green background, you find everything which is related to the research that had been carried out. So the commentary, why is this here? And you will have all the persons mentioned, all this kind of stuff. And here, there's a third layer on this, because now we did some enriching of the data so that in future time you can link for many persons, not for all of them, but for many persons, you will find more additional information, but this information is automatically drawn via the linking to Wikidata, the Getty, ULIN, or other kinds of controlled vocabulary or big databases like Wikidata. And you will also can find links to other databases if this person has already some relation to another database. We have the project Own Reality has a time span that is really dense to the Deutsch-Französische Kunstvermittlung, so you can find, Pierre Bonnat is also, there are also 27 records in the database Own Reality somehow refer to Pierre Bonnat. Another enrichment and a layer of information is that we now traced approximately 2,500 of the entries. We could trace a link to the digitized materials, so that we now plan, or we prototyped to embed a IIIF viewer into our website, and people really can find the article at the right page open and get an impression of the context. So this is what we did at the moment on the prototype. And speaking about this enrichment we did, this was also important because we want also open up the data for machine readable or transfer them also with machines. And for that, this enrichment was also a quality improvement, especially for finding doubles and grouping them in the persons, but not normalize them. So we don't want to change the data in themselves, but we set another layer of information above them so that the doubles will not change your statistical approaches. But still you have all kinds of different spelling of the persons, because this is important, because these different spellings are go back to the different sources brought together. Yeah, I try to be really fast, and I move on to the machine readable, and here really was the question how to. So this is not so much about, we had not the idea to just produce some CSV files and give them away. You could do this, but we thought it is interesting to apply all these different layers of semantics and also the history of the data onto the data. So we are testing right now the linked art data model for this. Because why linked art data model? Firstly, you write JSON files, and JSON is developer friendly, and this is primordial, I think, for really repurposed data. It's linked art data model is proposed by a community of museums and collections, and that has we think this has a broad overlap with our respective community in art history. And what is most important to me, it's based on CyDoc CRM, and that means it is event-based. And this allows us, so we hope, to describe a data record in a database as a digital object. This digital object has an event of the creation, and the creation produced the bibliographic information, the transcription, the keywords, all of the stuff. But a digital object also has another event, the curation, and here in the curation happens the semantic enrichment, connection to Getty-Hewlett, to IIIF manifest, and also for sure the data modeling, so that we remodel the data to apply the linked data model is another curation event. So I would love to go into this JSON really, but I think this would not be very appropriated for the group. Okay, very shortly, in the data model, you can really easily describe the bibliographic information. There's everything you need to do this, linguistic object, article, and so on. And important thing is all the terms, the categories you use are referring mostly to the Getty vocabulary of the arts and architectural thesaurus. That is very important for my domain of art history and archaeology. You can easily describe the synopsis. This is researchers talking, justifying why is this record interesting. So some kind of also some kind of abstract of the articles. And you can also really easily describe this activity I was talking about, the data curation. So you have types of activities. You can say it's a curation. Curation is also something you can find in the Getty AAT. You can assign this activity. You can give them a time span, and there's more to do on this. And for sure, you can also add to your JSON file a place to explain who was part of this curation team if you want to. So this is very, very promising, but I also admit that at the moment, each of the records produce a very long JSON file, and in respective to sustainability and usability, this might pose some problems. So we are currently thinking about splitting this JSON file into different preform questions, you might say. But this is in the current moment, this is our idea how to answer the question of serving the integrity of the data and attribute data curation. And it's a way to open up the data. And another point of this project, I do not want to go deeper on this, is that we carry out interviews with the former team members who really feed the database and the former PIs of the former project. to also give a real context of the history of this database, to describe and get a hand on the bias, because there is a lot of bias into this, and I think this is very important to add this. Otherwise, you cannot reuse this data in a meaningful way. That is, I think. Thanks a lot for your attention. A special thanks to my crew at the DFK Paris and my developer in Los Angeles. Thanks a lot, and I'm very curious about your questions.
Thank you, Anne. Any one short question, perhaps? Victoria, moment. I'm your host now, co-host, please.
Okay, I managed both of it. Sorry for the delay. First, it is late in Tokyo, but my best greetings to France. And I think the most of the participants doesn't know me. I am a linguist and a semiotician who is connected to Japanese studies. But in my long life, I made a lot of things, also studied Romanic, Germanic, and even Slavic languages. And I wanted just to give you some ideas, or also ask you whether you thought of doing this, because now all of you are from history or social sciences or art history, people who are not often trained in historical linguistics or language or philology, because the modern studies are not, in modern studies it's not a basic element. And I don't want to complain that in former times everything was better, but you are working now in, as we linguists call, on super central languages. That means they have a very good semantic and database technology, and that are not many languages in the world. And I would connect one type of the standard average European languages, and the other ones are the Sino-Japanese part, it's the Japanese. And now we experience the connection of all these linguistic spaces in the world. And it's a very meaningful and very useful technology now, the digital technology, because we get better estimation what categories or topics reveal about our or others' mind or history or social differences. So it's a good technology. I like it very much, and nothing is against it. But I think because of these humanities and social science and all these historical divisions of science, we should connect all these in a better way. So I think, for instance, KÜMMERLE-san, for your political issue with the parliament, you should also use NINJA, the National Institute for Japanese Language, which has also the analysis of all these concepts, or other people can also get the German to Leipzig digital databases where you can put the scientific or the terminology for a specific context into the wider context, or also, as Ms. KLAMMT told, the historical layers or the changes you can see in a better way. And for semantics, I think that's the greatest problem with linguistics, that at school education and everywhere we get a very old-fashioned and very one pattern and very unpleasant art of explaining linguistic or language matters. So I think if you, for instance, get more information about cognitive linguistic, cognitive semantics, or prototypical semantics, that is meaning how I can connect the context and the words, and then words have always. I think the most suspicious word in the world would be a word with only one meaning, for instance, you know. But dictionaries tell us that there is a main meaning and there are the sub-meanings and all these things, which is in a way true, but it's not true in a language if you use it in the context. So there are family contexts or different parts of the meaning which are connected, and that's the topic you are interested in. How is it connected to other meanings? And of course, for instance, I liked very much this multilingual project with the website of Hypothesis. And only to mention that in Europe, I am now working for Tokyo College. That's an institution at Tokyo University for language strategy for Japanese. And we have a very imbalanced situation that European institutions do not explain things in Chinese or Japanese, but the other side would do it. Yeah. And now we have to connect it somehow. It takes a lot of money and it costs a lot, you know. But then we can also connect, for instance, in political discourse. I would be interested how many loan words, for instance, from English are used, and what are the Chinese part or the Japanese part, because it's also connected to social social layers in Japan or education, and who could, for instance, understand a television program where you can hear all these discussions from the Japanese parliament, you know. And now I stop my comment. I enjoyed very much your presentations and I learned a lot. Okay.
I have I really like this intervention because Anne, by the way, Anne gave the button to me, and that's why I answer now. The division in natural sciences on the one side and humanities on the other side, I really don't consider it that fruitful, not at all. Actually, I've studied history of sciences. Reproducing the divide into two cultures is a no-go for me, but the other institutes do it all the time, who are now muted. And this is the reason why I think the area studies are kind of not that easy in contributing digitally. And it has to do with imagined publics. Yes, you can easily engage with a Western public if you imagine it homogeneously. The Japanese would, and the Chinese would kind of consider how to present it in English to a international audience with a very different outset. Yes, and regarding corpus analysis, actually, when I conceptualized this and was talking to a historian of physics at the Sokendai, my usage of topic models actually aims at the praxeological level of the speech performance in that situation, beyond the linguistic level. It's really a course, a way of navigating. It's actually not a language I am that interested in. And I'm really aware of that. And I was actually asked, well, how is your approach going beyond what could be done in language philosophy? And that's what I am aiming for. I know that these problems are there. I wonder how disciplined historians in a critical, in a slightly negative way, would answer to all your, the issues you raised. I would really be interested. Anyone of the historical institutes?
No, well, as an archaeologist, I feel easy about the question, because archaeology is always also a little bit between all the worlds. So what is really interesting is because we use very much in DIJ Humanities the term semantics. And I often feel this must be horrible for a real linguist, because we use it in a very, very certain way. And sometimes we only say, we explain, we cut down the immense richness of linguistic or the imagination of words and their ambiguity that is so interesting about words. And we really feed them to machines so that machines can transfer from human a clear understanding to another human. That is what we are doing. And this is rather dull in a way. But what is rather fascinating about this and was really the presentation of Harald about data and the different meaning of information and data, because this is something I'm really very interested in, because we are always talking about research data and the repurposing of research data, but I really wonder if we are repurposing data or if we're repurposing information. And when you think about it, could be something really different in Japan or in the States or in Paris, talking about information. This really underlines on one way that we have this machines for disambiguation, but also we have to reflect always that there was this disambiguation, and this disambiguation is clearly centered in the Western part of the world at the moment. And when we always use the Getty architecture and arts thesaurus, this is often something I wonder if this is really appropriate. I really wonder, and I'm working really on Western culture, so normally it should fit, but I wonder.
Yeah, so my approach is actually post-humanist. Though there's post-humanist history, probably wouldn't be really counted to the humanities anymore, but really the algorithm, the agency of the algorithm is calculated into the research process. Now, when you do that, you can't really sovereignly talk about hermeneutics anymore. And that's where I kind of feel myself being drawn away from the disciplined historians. But I guess that's a problem of persons not working in the context of the West, who inherently have to engage with different publics, with very different publics, not with an Italian and with a German public, who kind of automatically can build all the genealogies in the head. What can they know, and so on. This is kind of assumed to be possible in the West, but it's not possible, and not assumed to be possible if you go to a completely other culture. Yeah, so perhaps the others turn on their camera in the last spurt for our session. Jana is back. I make her a co-host again. And now this last contribution was kind of showing that there's more than history in the West, which is often assumed to be the object. And most of my methodological inspirations are based on Western discourse and on contributions that Japanese make in English. But nevertheless, kind of, if you want to do justice to Japanese literature, you have to kind of get into their narrative structure, which then would already break kind of or would cause nuisance in the narrative layer of the journal by Andreas Vickers, for example. These are some uneasiness in area studies. Do you have at the other historical institutes, when engaging with people from other contexts, non-Western contexts, similar experiences? Mareike, if the other bloggers from the non-Western sphere, are they behaving weirdly?
No. I was just about to write something in the chat, because I think it's really an interesting point that you bring up, but a really difficult question. I don't really know what to say from my point of view. I can't say. We were thinking about it, even if you don't have to go as far, even between France and Germany, who are supposed to be also very different. We sometimes think about, do they blog, for example, the same way, and where are the differences, and also in the way how people express themselves and how they write. And of course, there are many differences, as you might even see going from North Germany to South Germany. But that's not what that's not your point. You're going much further away, and I'm not the one. You've got much more experience in that in these meetings of culture. But as I say, even in between France and Germany, it is sometimes a real clash already.
Yeah, I think if making these more explicit is something that is of value, because I don't claim that, or it's not reasonable anymore to claim that Japanese or Chinese are just considered, are not considered part of the international community. They make the effort, and I know that people who are not specialists in these regions also make the effort to a degree that is possible for them. But yeah, even in France and Germany, it's interesting that you say that already there the differences are perceptible. Then just write about them. Yes.
Yeah, we have a research group in Dakar, in Senegal. So it's again something really completely different. And the only thing is, I would be a little bit more optimistic than you are, because if I understood you right, you say it's actually not possible to get things together. I would say you can. It's a special effort from both sides to try to understand and see the differences, but that's that transcultural knowledge or ways of doing research is very specific. I agree, and I think it also demands a lot of energy in intellectual ways, but also, of course, technological is what Victoria Eschenbach just said about differences and difficulties to in a semantic way or linguistic way. That's for sure. But it's well said, I would say, so to end on a positive note.
Yes. Anne, perhaps not.
Yeah, very shortly. I think this is a very important point that you raised, because it's really, really interesting, because digital humanist is a kind of a bastard. In the Western, it's a bastard. Between, this is very hard word, sorry, my English is not appropriate enough to have a really good word for this. So it's really, it's Twitter, between the traditional natural sciences or math and information sciences and humanist science. And it's really extremely interesting to work in the Max Weber Foundation to find more out about all these countries who don't have these traditions. So this could be also very interesting for the raised questions from Jana according to the gender gap in this, because in other countries, like for instance India, it is informatics is very much female driven. This is quite normal to have a career in information technology. It's very different to Europe, where this is slowly building up. We have to tell girls that coding is okay. It's really cool to code. This is not the topic in other countries and in other cultures. And I think this could be amazingly interesting also to look in this way on research going on in what we call digital humanities, and that might be a very strange term for other countries and other cultures to talk about our research as digital humanities. So this is really interesting, and I would love to follow on this for the next years as a kind of meta topic in the Max Weber Foundation.
Yeah, that would be very interesting, yes. So the time is running out already, 11 minutes over time. What I want to add is a very interesting thing. Next year, the Digital Humanities International Conference is taking part in Tokyo. So that may be opportunity to make, to carry out networking, to make contacts. But I saw that the call for papers is available in 5 languages. And they are all European, like 100 years ago. exactly like that. And you could, if somebody wants to know about the history of scholarship in general, before the First World War and the Esperanto movement, and it was very important that Europeans can learn the language easily. What the Japanese and the Chinese, no, they can put a little bit more effort, but these traces come to we can still see them today. But I think, yeah, with for example, the meeting next year, in another framework like today perhaps, but also then in Tokyo, if you are there, I think that would be very fruitful and interesting. Okay, so Franz, you want to?
Well, I'm just listening, of course. These incommensurabilities, yeah, I mean, everybody confronts it in many areas, many dimensions of one's research. So we did a blog on comparisons, and every time you do comparisons, I think you confront similar issues. So I don't think that you can integrate fully integrate these or overcome such differences. And what you can do is to have a fruitful dialogue. No? So of course on a mutual respect, on an equal level. And from that, I think all parties can benefit, and maybe something new can develop. But that would be sort of my positive note. But it's an open, of course, it's an open question, and it would be wonderful, yeah, if pandemic can be controlled to such an extent that we can freely travel again, and Japan will open its borders also for researchers, not only for Japanese and those with diplomatic or business purpose. Yeah, thanks a lot. Also Harald for moderating, we co-organized the series, and of course this was a little highlight because today I think was a really true Max Weber Foundation event. The events before had the same title, but there was of course not so much participation from the different institutes. So maybe also something to repeat in the near future on different topics. Again, thanks a lot, and I hope to welcome you in the near future here in Tokyo. Thank you. Also to Victoria. Thanks. Good to see you.
Goodbye. Okay.
Bye.